Hi, I'm Antonio Selle. This video is the second one in a case study to check whether a selection of controlled and manipulated variables is fit for a given purpose. We are studying steady-state reference tracking, that is, ensuring that the gain of my process is high enough so that requested output changes can be achieved without hitting actuator limits. In a first video, we discussed the problem statement, the scaling, and the singular value decomposition approach, and in this video, we'll test other actuator configurations and also we'll plot the resulting ellipsoids that are underlying the mathematical interpretation of all this stuff. If we review our first video's results, we had this model. In this operating point, we discussed only setpoint changes, so H will be not considered here. This matrix G had this DC gain, and my problem was checking if I could achieve this increments of output with this admissible increments of input. There was an output scaling and input scaling step in which I considered a worst case situation, which was the maximum desired increment for outputs and the minimum available increment for inputs, because our singular value approach here deals with symmetric setups around the origin, and with these scalings we obtained the scaled gain matrix and we computed the minimum gain 1.5 and the condition number 2.9, and they were deemed satisfactory because the unit 3D sphere in the input space mapped to something larger than the circle of radius 1.5 in the output space, so the selection was satisfactory. Let us now look in more detail at the meaning of this SVD. So we'll first have a look at the input and output principal directions by looking at the whole SVD decomposition, not just the gains. So the diagonal S matrix gives me the gains. V matrix are the so-called principal input directions, and U are the principal output directions. What do they mean? Well, this high gain maneuver is the easy maneuver. So basically, moving the second variable is easy. The hard maneuver is the low gain one, which is more or less aligned with moving the first variable while keeping the second one basically constant, well, less than 10% of the movement of the first one. So these are maneuvers viewed from the output point of view, but if we view them from the input point of view, we see that this increment of the actuator's position has a large effect, and this increment has a smaller effect, and well, last, this increment has no effect. It is the null space of the DC gain. We have 3 actuators, but just 2 outputs, and then of course, as the matrix is not square, it has a null space given by this. This is the movement of actuators that has no effect on the outputs. So here we have something to remark. This movement is basically aligned with my second input, and indeed the input importance in the other maneuvers is not so significant. So maybe this hints that we may eliminate the second input, leave it in, let's say, a manual mode, so it's only modified in startup or calibration procedures, because it's somehow not too aligned with the input directions? Well, with this hint, if I look at this line of code and I put here a 0, then this means that I am multiplying the second column of G by 0. So, analyzing what to do if this actuator does not increment. Well, in such a case, this was the old SVD decomposition. Before changing the actuator configuration, look at the gains, 4.36, 1.498, and if I run the script again, you can see that the minimum gain is basically the same. It's only in the fourth decimal digit where changes appear, and the maximum gain just lowers from 4.36 to 4.31. So 0 increments on actuator 2 do not seem to have any effect on the minimum and maximum gains. Of course, now the null space is perfectly aligned with actuator 2 because the column is 0, but then the remaining two actuators somehow execute the same maneuvers. Easy one moving second output, difficult one moving first output, and those maneuvers have basically the same gain. There is a negligible gain loss, so indeed it seems that dismissing actuator 2 could be a wise choice if we could save some money in control instrumentation. What would happen if we do the same with other actuators? Well, if I now check what would happen by not incrementing actuator 1, then we have here a maneuver with gain significantly less than 1, 7 times less than wished. So not using actuator 1 does not seem a wise choice, and also repeating again, in this case not incrementing actuator 3, gets me again an SVD with a minimum gain less than 1, sort of 3 times less than required. So the conclusion is that removing actuator 2 seems a wise choice because its effect is small and can be readily handled by the remaining two actuators, but removing actuator 1 or 3 is not that good. Okay, let us now connect again all three actuators and graphically depict what's the meaning of this singular value decomposition, input, gains, and output directions. If we recall, these orthogonal matrices U and V, input and output directions, tell me that the input sphere in this coordinate basis is transformed to an output ellipse in this coordinate basis U with minor half axis 1.5 and major half axis 4.4. How do we draw it? Well, if I call M the gain times its transposed, it's a 2 by 2 matrix. It has the dimensions of the output, and this is the boundary of the ellipse. You can pause and see the details on screen. Apart from this output ellipse, I am drawing here the circle of radius 1, and in here I am drawing the circle of radius equal to the minimum singular value, minimum gain, and some other stuff. We'll first see the actual plot, and then later on you can get back a few seconds and analyze the code if so wished. The importance is not the code, it's the meaning of the plots we are going to discuss right now. So this is the plot that represents the action of my gain matrix on the input unit sphere. The input unit sphere is transformed to the red ellipse. That red ellipse has a minimum gain, minimum axis, given by the cyan line, and of course is then tangent to the purple dashed circle, which is the circle of radius 1.5. cyan line is this output direction times 1.5. The major axis is again this other output direction times 4.4. So we see that the hard maneuver is moving 1.5 units, variable 1, and the easy maneuver is moving 4.4 units, variable 2, more or less. It's not exactly that, there is a certain angle, but okay, you get the idea. So this is the important thing, and as we required the purple circle being larger than the unit circle, which we can see here in yellow, then our manipulated variable selection fulfills our goal of moving the outputs inside the whole unit circle. In fact, inside the whole 1.5 circle or more. They actually move it inside the red ellipse. The pink arrows indicate maneuvers associated to each column of the gain matrix. This downwards pointing small one is column 2. We see that indeed its effect is very small compared to the other two, and somehow the other two are sufficient to get more or less the same ellipse we are getting now. As a last observation, in order to analyze the geometry of the polyhedra, maybe what our customer actually wants is moving the outputs in the square with vertices at plus minus 1. That square is the green square. This is the conservatism between SVD and polyhedron. However, SVD is a one-liner in MATLAB, and we can interpret these input gains and output directions, but the polyhedron approach, it's somehow not too easy to intuitively understand, but we'll see that in another video. In here we just can see that we were lucky, because even if we wished to move my outputs in the green square, as the radius of the purple circle is larger than the square root of 2, which is the half diagonal of this square, then this radius of 1.5 allows me to certify that we indeed are able to cover the whole green square with inputs in my unit sphere. So we are sure that the polyhedron-based approach to the same problem that we will see in other videos will render indeed feasible. This is because we were lucky with this square root of 2 argumentation. This may not always be the case. So we will conclude here. We analyzed in further depth the results of a previous first video on this case study. We showed that the unit sphere mapped into the red ellipse, and that red ellipse contained the purple circle, so it indeed was able to move the outputs at any arbitrary point inside the yellow circle, and in fact it can also move the outputs in any arbitrary point inside the green square. Principal maneuvers are the half axis of the ellipse, so we can understand which are the easiest and the most difficult movements of my outputs. So we'll end here, and polyhedron approaches and disturbance rejection will be addressed in future videos in this case study. Thanks for watching.